Hi, welcome to True Creeps, where the stories are true and the creeps are real. We'll cover stories from grotesque gore to the possibly plausible paranormal, to horrifying history, to tense and terrible true crime, and everything else that goes bump in the night. We're your hosts, Amanda,
and I'm Lindsay, and we want you to join us while we creep.
We cover mature topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the murders of Rebecca Dolly Davis, Iva Watson, Evelyn Dieterich, and Kathleen Patricia Gouldin. This series of murders from Elkridge, Maryland was dubbed the Mannequin Murders, which also is how we found this case, because I was like, there has to be some weird mannequin cases, just kind of like looking for a case to cover, and this came up, and I was like, oh, I've never heard of this.
All I think of is that Criminal Minds episode where he turns them into dolls, or I don't know. I think mannequin, but it's dolls.
Yeah.
I don't know if that comes into your head, but that's what comes into my head.
It does. I think mannequin. I think of that movie with Tyra Banks. That's actually where my head goes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about how the moniker of the Mannequin Murders came up, but then we don't talk about mannequins anymore because they've never been fully tied to the case.
Mm-hmm.
But so, around the time of the murders, residents found headless mannequins tied into trees in the area about 20 feet up.
That is frightening.
Yes. So, look, a mannequin, like a normal mannequin, nothing weird, existing in a tree purposefully, I am unnerved.
Yep.
It moves around. It's in different places. I am scared.
Yeah.
As a note, the mannequins were popping up in different places. It appeared to be the same mannequin being moved. I don't think that makes it less scary because this person's moving a mannequin around. It's fucking weird. To make it worse, the mannequin was very clearly slashed with a knife. You could see cut wounds in it. I say wounds like it's a person, but you could see cut marks into the mannequin. And then there was red paint splatters on his chest.
I hate it.
Yes.
I hate it so much.
Yes. I hate it too. So I can just imagine looking up and being like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
So at least one of them was found with a knife lodged in its chest. The sheer force of that.
Whoever's doing this is also unwell. We need to figure out who was doing this and why, because something is wrong.
If it's the same person, I am unnerved.
Yeah.
If it's not, I am still unnerved. So as I mentioned before, the mannequins moved several times. Before, it was just the headless torso hung in a tree.
Right.
But then the legs started just showing up about. Nothing done to them.
Okay.
Just mannequin legs around being moved. I don't fucking like it.
I know it's not the same, but I only think of Rocket Raccoon for that. He wants to steal the leg.
I don't remember this at all.
Guardians of the Galaxy? No?
My brain has deleted this. I don't know why. So people would see the mannequin and be like, ugh. Call the police because they were like, what the fuck is this? And then the police would come and then sometimes it would be gone. But eventually they got there in time, finally, and were able to get the one that had the knife stuck in its chest, and they dusted it for fingerprints, but there were none.
Weird.
Police were unsure of whether the mannequins were related to the murders, but the name still stuck. The people that lived in the area, they were terrified of the murders. They were terrified of these fucking mannequins. And they were very sure that the two were a part of the same thing.
I mean, some of it relates, right? So I see it.
Some of it relates. And it's a really scary thing to think you have two, at least, fucking scary, unsettling people around.
Mm-hmm.
It feels more soothing to be like, there's just one bad guy. Or
that's right.
True. There's only one
Yeah.
person doing disturbing things around. I can get the draw for that. It doesn't make it true, but I can understand why you're like, okay, one bad person.
Right. Or it could just be a weird prank.
Yeah.
And it's not even a bad person. It's a group of kids trying to fuck with people, but still, either way, it's unsettling.
But so sources vary on whether the mannequins popped up both before and after, but at the very least, they were showing up in the days after the very first murder. So if they were a prank afterwards, that's disgusting. And I'm just going to say maybe you're bad. That's it. That's bad person behavior.
That's fair.
So the cases that we're going to cover for today were not chronologically solved. So we're going to go through them in order of the investigations because it's important to see how did we catch our murderer first? Because that's how the other murders were solved.
It makes more sense this way.
Yeah, it does. So we end up starting at the last murder, to our knowledge, and then going back to the beginning.
Right, right. So the first person we're going to talk about is Kathleen Patricia Gouldin. And Kathleen was a manager at a nightclub called Fat Tuesdays, which was located in Baltimore. Have you ever been to Fat Tuesdays?
Mm-mm.
No?
No.
It's a fun time. We've gone on Halloween before. Fun time, fun place. Very busy, though.
I just need you to know that if it's a fun time that you would go to on like a party holiday, just assume I haven't been there.
I mean, it's not any time recently. I'm very old now, but like when I was fun.
Oh, no. I've never not been just a settled, chill lady. I'm a homebody.
Okay, fair.
Anywho.
One of her friends who also worked at the same nightclub mentioned that Kathleen had a habit of not locking her doors because she thought her neighborhood was safe. Which always makes me feel so sad because they feel safe and they're like, nothing bad will happen, and then it's always them. And it's so awful. So from everything we saw about Kathleen, she seemed pretty close with her family and just generally a lovely person. And to show how close she was with her family, the night before she died, she was actually hanging out with them. So her family and her sister was there. They were eating crabs, which I have learned from Lindsay is a very Maryland thing to do.
It is.
She was asking me before we were recording, like, if I would eat crabs if I moved there. And I was like, no.
I was trying to give her like a really hard sell. It's also because if you move to Maryland, unless you're hanging out with vegans, people are going to ask you if you've tried them endlessly. And if you just do it, then you can be like, I tried it, I didn't like it. So what I'm telling you is you should lie. Learn to lie about it.
I tried it and I didn't like it.
Perfect. Love that for you.
So just to show how close they were, her family only lived half a mile away from her apartment. So like pretty close knit.
Close.
Yeah. So then on July 4th of 1989, Kathleen was laying in her bed inside her apartment when someone shot her with a shotgun through her bedroom window.
Terrifying.
That's so scary to think about.
Yes.
Just, you're in your bed. You're safe in your bed, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, I wouldn't even think that was an option.
Right.
I would be like, oh, I'm inside.
At home, you should be safe.
Yeah. At minimum.
And then from here, it's going to get just so fucking bad. The assailant then broke into her apartment and raped her as she died and then after she died. Horrific, but also very bold, considering they just made a loud sound with a gun.
Yeah, and also, like, literally, what the fuck?
Yes.
What the fucking fuck?
No, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
So when law enforcement got to the scene, one of the things that they noticed was an empty pizza box outside of her apartment with a name on it. If you can guess where we're going with that.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty quickly, they realized that the name on the pizza box matched someone who had spoken with Kathleen just hours before she died, and then said that they had eaten pizza with a person named Vernon Lee Clark, and that she offered for him to take the rest of the pizza with him when he left. Now, when they found the pizza box, it was empty. They then checked the pizza box for prints, and of course, it did match Clark's fingerprints. He had previously been arrested for burglary, so they already had his fingerprints on file, so I guess lucky for them in that sense.
I thought it was interesting that they were like, and then we found his prints on the pizza box, because it makes sense that regardless of anything else, if he took the box with him, that his prints would be on it. And the pizza box, if outside, would be empty by critters or humans. It's an interesting way to link everyone together.
Yes. So interestingly, witnesses said that they saw Clark hanging around the parking lot of Kathleen's apartments several times in the weeks leading up to her murder. And we've said it with a couple other cases that we've covered, especially when they happen in apartments. There's a lot more people in apartments. So they see a lot more of what's going on, which is, good in a sense, because in quiet neighborhoods, half the time people are like, oh, I didn't see a car. Or, I didn't see this person drive by. But apartments know what's going on.
This happened after the first few murders. So people were very aware of anyone who did not live in an area. They were like, I know who my neighbors are on my street. Why is this person on my street? About anybody.
Right.
But specifically in an apartment building, typically, if you're hanging out in just the parking lot, people are going to be like, what the fuck is this person doing?
Mm-hmm. Who are you?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
Exactly.
Who are you visiting? Yeah. So Clark had first met Kathleen when she worked at a local liquor store, but they weren't friends or anything. They just knew who each other were. Later, Kathleen's mother would say that he was known around town as Stinky because he worked for a trash removal company as well. So, like, they knew of each other and her family knew who he was.
Yeah. Law enforcement went to Clark's home to execute a search warrant on both his home and his vehicle. And so they ring the doorbell. They explain why they're there. He then punches and bites the police officers, and he bit them so hard that he drew blood. So they immediately arrest him for assault, and he's in jail from early August to late September. While he was in jail, they took a DNA sample and sent it to the crime lab. Now, in early January of 1991, there really hadn't been much movement in the case. So Kathleen's family members and members of the community were able to raise a $6,000 reward for information. Basically, like right after this, Clark's DNA was tested against the bodily fluids and semen that had been found on Kathleen's body. There was a complete match for the DNA. On January 26, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. This was the first case in Howard County where DNA was used to prosecute.
That doesn't seem all that long ago, right? Like when we think about the advances in DNA.
It really doesn't. Like early 90s? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so before the trial for Kathleen's murder began, Clark, his excuse was that like he wasn't responsible because right before the murder, he was doing drugs with sex workers. And so like he wasn't in his right mind. And I want you to remember that scenario. End of the episode. We're going to circle back to it. But that was his excuse. And I'm like, how is that better? Also, like, I don't care who you're doing drugs with. Like, is it different if you're doing it with a sex worker? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
What does that have to do with anything? During the trial, Kathleen's mother, Margaret, was not permitted to attend because she may have been called as a witness, which is awful.
Yeah.
Clark was found guilty of first-degree murder on April 17th of 1991, and an anonymous letter was sent to the judge before the sentencing hearing. And in that letter, the writer claimed, 1, that Clark was innocent, and 2, that they had actually witnessed Kathleen's murder. The gun that was used to shoot Kathleen, Clark had taken from his job.
Oh my gosh.
So they could like match the gun to his possession.
Yeah.
So Clark's sentencing was in August of 1991, and he was sentenced to life in prison, thankfully.
And we're going to talk about him in a moment, along with other victims of his horribleness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to me that he was able to murder others before this, and then this is where he slips up, like because he got so comfortable, he's leaving a fucking pizza box like right outside.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's like a Chad DeBall moment.
At this point, he'd gotten away with it a few times and had been pretty sloppy.
Yeah.
It was surprising that he had gotten away so many times from this.
Right.
I think that part of this is just that the technology wasn't there to match him in the same way.
He left a fucking pizza box with a name on it. So, like, that's not even DNA. It's just like,
absolutely.
Here's who I was with tonight, you know?
Yeah, I mean, dumb. Dumb.
Yeah, real dumb.
You ever, like, go to someone's house and eat pizza, and the pizza is there, and you don't look at the labels on the box. You don't know that it has the person's name, because when you pick it up or it's delivered, like, they put the person's name on the box.
Yeah.
It may not have even registered that it was there.
But just the fact that he's like, I'm going to eat this pizza, now I'm going to go do this.
Yes! It's all fucked.
We'll talk about more of that in a minute.
Yeah,
but
it's all
so
fucked.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this asshole. So he was born on December 28th of 1955 in Elk Ridge, Maryland. So that's a small area, like people know each other there. He began getting in trouble at school and with law enforcement in his early teens, so it started pretty early. He was convicted of drug possession, burglary, and assault as an adult. In the early 80s, he began working as an animal skinner at an animal rendering plant, which is like the worst job I can even imagine.
Agreed.
And then at the time, he was also working like odd jobs around the area. After Kathleen's murder, people who knew him were super shocked. His coworkers described him as hardworking and even noted that he loved his hometown.
So Kathleen's murder, heinous.
Yeah.
Truly disgusting and appalling. There had been other unsolved murders in the area, which was strange because it wasn't a place where there was a lot of crime. So there being one murder was awful, but there being a series of murders was even stranger.
Yeah.
So they were like, let's check Clark's DNA against DNA found at the other scenes.
I'm glad they did.
And there were 3 other scenes that they were able to tie him to. And so let's talk a little bit about those murders and the victims. So the very first victim that we are aware of from Clark was Rebecca Davis. She went by Dolly, so we're going to call her Dolly. We have a full write-up of her life that we were able to read that was from a newspaper article. And we so often do not get this level of detail, especially from victims that were like several decades ago. She was born in 1909, and her parents were Clara and Marion Davis. Before their marriage, Clara's mother was an artist and an actress, so it's not altogether surprising that Dolly's going to end up going into art.
Mm-hmm.
She also had a younger brother named Marion Jr. Dolly graduated from Bryn Mawr College in Philly in 1932 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, and when she was there, she studied painting, art history, and archaeology. After she graduated, she worked at the Baldwin School in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, teaching art. And while she was doing that, she was also taking painting classes at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts.
I love her.
If you learn anything about Dolly, it's that she could do whatever the fuck she wanted, and she was going to get things done. She received a scholarship to travel to Europe to visit famous art museums. So for the year of 1937, that's what she did.
How fun.
So she came back and moved to Baltimore. She did a lot of painting during that time. But then during World War II, Dolly suddenly stopped painting. And she said this because she didn't think that art was proper during wartime and that people should be focused more about what was going on in the world, which is an interesting idea because I think that now people are kind of like art is important at all times, even when things are very bad.
Like now.
Yeah, like now. But Dolly never painted again.
Oh.
One of her friends years later was like, don't you want to go back to painting? Like, don't you miss it? And she was like, I've said everything I needed to say. I love the idea of being able to enjoy something for a season of your life and being comfortable being like, nope, I did what I wanted with that, and now I can move to the next thing. I love that. So she then went to the Union Theological Seminary School in New York from 1941 to 1943, then worked in Episcopal parishes as a director of education. When she was doing that, she lived in Iowa, Kentucky, and then eventually came back to Maryland. And in her own parish, she would volunteer with the sick and elderly regularly. And from everything we read, one of the constant themes in her life is that she shows up for her community and she shows up for the people around her.
Yeah.
In just this incredibly loving way.
Right, right. Also, I had to look at some of her paintings and she was very good.
Mm-hmm. Her paintings are beautiful.
Yeah. I love when we get to like find new art when we're doing these episodes.
Mm-hmm. So then Dolly moves to her next life.
So that was in 1960, and Dolly attended Coppin State College so that she can earn a certification in teaching children with learning disabilities. And that takes a special person.
And in the 1960s.
Yes. She worked with civil rights organizations and the Human Rights Commission in Howard County. So again, good person.
Yeah.
And then in the 70s, Dolly was a volunteer tutor at Woodson Elementary School, and that's in southeastern Baltimore City. She tutored second and third graders in math 5 days a week. Second and third graders are hard.
And also 5 days a week. She's doing this. She's a volunteer. Like, she's not getting paid.
Right, right. And she would take her students to restaurants and also paid for them to attend the circus.
I love this so much.
Can we find a nicer person than this? The principal of the school that she tutored at, her name was Marguerite Walker. And she just had the most lovely story about Dolly that we wanted to share. So one of the students accidentally threw her glasses away when she threw away her lunch tray, which, right, that happens. That's very common at a school. By the time the girl realized it, though, the trash had already been taken to the dumpster. The next morning, it was raining, and that's when Principal Walker got to the school. And what she saw when she arrived was Dolly had climbed into the dumpster with a ladder. She had boots on. She was ready to look for these glasses. She rummaged through the dumpster until she found those glasses.
I love her.
Like, imagine school lunch being thrown away too, like the worst of the worst garbage.
Oh, yeah. Like, stinky. And it's also like the next day and then it's raining. Ugh, gross all around.
Yes, I don't know anyone that would do that. So she is a special person. Principal Walker also said, quote, "She was always so determined, and she found the glasses. I know that I will never find another Miss Davis. Everybody who ever came here and met her said she was just a remarkable person." And through this, you know that was true, right?
Yeah.
Heart of gold. Dolly's friend, Mrs. Fiddler, said that Dolly had a lovely garden, but it always looked a bit cluttered because Dolly couldn't bring herself to thin out her plants. And I get that so much. I'm always like, do you remember when we were talking about how people are saying when plants are hurting, they scream and we just can't hear it? And now I'm like, I can't cut this plant. It will scream and I will hurt it.
Yeah.
She knew this already.
Yeah.
Mrs. Fiddler also said that Dolly built as much as she could on her own. So she built things like small fences and birdhouses and just cute touches for her garden. People said that something that Dolly often said was, quote, "You can't live in fear. You can't live that way. We need more Dollys in this world right now."
Yeah.
Dolly regularly had neighborhood kids come over, and she was close with a lot of them. Like we talked about in the Emmy episode, like when kids flock to a person
Yeah.
and they feel happy and comfortable with them, that's rare.
Yeah.
Dolly's nephew said if she had continued painting, he thought that she would have been very successful. And I agree. Like we found a few of her paintings and they were great. He also said that she was specifically good at portraits. He also mentioned that he thought that one of the reasons they were having a hard time identifying the suspect was because she had lived so many lives and she knew so many people. She had her hand in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Like, she came across a lot of different types of people in different places. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So in the 1970s, Clark began doing yard work for Dolly. I just want to point out that he knew her. He knew her as she was, as this lovely human. He knew her. This wasn't a stranger to him.
Right.
On February 16th of 1980, Clark attacked Dolly with a knife. At the time, they were outside of her home. He stabbed her to death and then sexually assaulted her. Originally, when we were learning about these cases, we did not realize that the rapes were happening during and after death. We thought they were before, but there was a Washington Post article that specifically said, like, there was evidence that he was sexually assaulting them after death.
Right. And as they're dying, like just the thought of that is horrific.
You're going to see a pattern where it's clear that this is what he is purposely doing.
Yeah.
He is purposely hurting them in a way where they are not immediately dying so that he can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Clark then hid Dolly's body in the woods behind her home. She was 70 years old when he murdered her. Dolly's body was found just a week later. She had a maid that would come once a week. Typically, after she cleaned the house, Dolly would drive her maid to the bus stop so she didn't have to walk there. And Dolly wasn't home when the maid got there. She didn't see her in the house anywhere. So she was like, I'm going to wait around for a few hours. But Dolly never shows up. So the next day, the maid goes to clean Mrs. Fiddler's house, who we talked about earlier. And she's like, hey, like, Dolly never came home. This is strange. And Mrs. Fiddler called one of Dolly's neighbors, who then called the police on February 22nd. Police came out and searched her home and then her property. They found Dolly's remains at the back of her property against a fence that runs along I-95. And law enforcement believe that someone had tried to like cover her with the brush a bit. So like they didn't make a grave. They just kind of like put things over her. You didn't immediately see her. Women in the area reasonably are then terrified, right? Because this is the first of them. Like we talked about Kathleen first, but Kathleen's what got him caught. Dolly was the first known victim.
Mm-hmm.
So women in the area, very scared. They begin installing deadbolts inside their homes. Also, everyone is scared. When people answer the door, they'll have a gun on them. Men were afraid to leave their wives at home because, like, this is a 70-year-old woman. Who the fuck does this to a 70-year-old woman?
Right. At her home.
So they start, like, when they're at work, they're, like, calling their home several times a day to make sure their wives are okay because they're scared for them. So the medical examiner said that it appeared that a short, stubby knife was used for multiple stab wounds to her neck. And law enforcement believes that it's likely that Clark stayed at her home after for that night.
Oh, and I just think of the maid cleaning up after him then.
Yes.
You know, like,
Yes.
not even her, but cleaning up after whatever he did.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is, so the maid comes in and cleans it up, but luckily she knows Dolly. So she's like, this is strange. So she's like, not only did she not come home, but there were open jars of peanut butter and applesauce that were just left on the counter. And that's not like Dolly.
Right. So Mrs. Fiddler's like, yeah, you're right. That isn't.
Exactly.
And luckily they both knew Dolly enough to be like, that's a red flag. Also, we've said it before, but like people that commit a murder and then like go into that person's home and like make a sandwich or eat, it's just another level of fucked up. Like we've talked about it in a few cases in the last couple of years. And I'm like, how can one do that?
Yeah. An interesting wrinkle here is who would know better what your house is than your maid?
Right.
Because she came and cleaned up right after, she was like, weird jars of stuff. Then she was like, hey, the bed was completely unmade. Dolly normally made the bed. She would typically like fully unmake the bed when the maid was coming over. Like she would pull the linens off. So it was strange that they were left like that.
Right. And that he slept in her bed.
Mm-hmm. And then the stove light was left on, and Dolly never used the stove light. I also feel like you were either pro stove light or anti stove light. There is no in between.
I think it's interesting that that was a detail that was known about her.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't know that about anyone else. I absolutely hate when the stove light is on. Like, I will get up and turn it off if Mike leaves it on because it's just annoying. I don't know why. I hate it on. It shouldn't be on.
Is it on with your fan?
Oh, the fan has to be off. I hate that damn fan. He always uses it, and I'm like, please, no. I hate the sound of it.
There's one in every marriage. Does it reflect off of your television, like where the light is?
No, not at all.
Is there any reason why the light makes you angry? No?
No,
not
at all.
I am pro stove light. I also have a sink light that I leave on all the time. If Ben tries to turn it off, I'm like, no, it stays on. It's like the kitchen night light.
Yeah.
Always on. You ready to like hurt inside? I actively like the sound of a fan like that.
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Again, it's clear that he stayed at her house because there's open jars of stuff. The bed is unmade. The stove light is on. Not like Dolly.
No, not at all. So let's move to the investigation. Over the course of almost 2 decades following Dolly's murder, there were over 30 county detectives that had gone over her case. We don't hear that a lot of people are like, no, we need to solve this. So that makes me happy that they tried.
Yeah. And the detective that eventually does solve it, he was like, I remember where I was when I found out Dolly died. Like, that's how important she was to her community.
Yeah. I'm sure if they had kids or anything too, like everyone knew Dolly. She helped all the kids, right?
Yeah.
So there was enough paperwork on this case to fill over 2 filing cabinets.
That's a lot of paper.
Again, we don't see that very often either.
Mm-mm.
They interviewed known serial killers, and law enforcement even spoke with psychics. The detective that called the psychic said that they were desperate. But I like that they tried like even out of the box things, right?
Yeah.
They followed hundreds of leads, but they couldn't figure out who had murdered Dolly. Clark was questioned by police because he did yard work at her home, but they didn't consider him a suspect.
Because he did yard work and he did odd jobs around the neighborhood, he was known. People knew who he was. They'd seen him around. Kathleen's mom said she called him Stinky. He was a person who they saw around, so seeing him around didn't immediately like trigger fear.
No.
He was a person who was supposed to be there because he was doing yard work. And so often when you think of crimes like this, you think of a stranger who nobody's met, not someone who's around who you thought you were safe with, but were not.
Right. Everyone knows him.
Mm-hmm.
And also the way that he covered her body. Like if he did yard work, I just think like, oh, did he have like brush that he kept over like to be ready?
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, there was a DNA match to Clark for Dolly's murder as well. So when they solved the first one, they're like, oh, wait, he matches others.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say that that's where he stopped, but he did murder more people. The next murder that he was tied to was a woman named Evelyn Dieterich. And when Evelyn's family members talked about her, they said that she was very independent. When talking about Evelyn, her neighbors said that she loved life. She was always cheerful. So again, another good person, right? Clark began working as a handyman for Evelyn. So remember, we said he did a lot of odd jobs.
Yeah.
This was one of them, right? He's doing yard work. He's doing handyman work. He's working
a trash removal service. Like he was working for a local business.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Clark.
So yeah, again, everyone knew him in some way, right? They were all connected. So let's talk about Evelyn's attack. On March 29th of 1981, Clark had hit Evelyn on the right side of her head with a blunt object. Then he strangled her. Just like the others too, he then sexually assaulted her. She was found by a child who was cutting through her backyard. They were using it as a shortcut, so by happenstance, they found her. Evelyn was found in the backyard wearing just her nightgown, which was pulled up to her torso.
It's bad enough that he did everything he did to her. It's made worse that after her death, he still couldn't let her have her dignity, right? Like he didn't pull her nightgown down. He made it so that it was up. Everybody could see everything. Yeah. Fuck you.
And that's just another like attack on her.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense.
Yeah, it is. It is.
that's how she's first found.
It's like continued disrespect.
Yes, yes. When police were investigating the scene, they found that Evelyn's phone line had also been cut, which is another interesting layer.
Yeah.
Additionally, both the lights in her home and her back floodlights were on. So they think that she stepped outside to investigate something suspicious. So perhaps he was making a noise or, something was happening.
Or maybe she heard him outside, like cutting the phone line.
Oh, maybe. They also found her slipper near the porch, and it was in an area of the ground where it showed signs of a struggle. So she probably stepped out there, and then that's when he attacked her.
Mm-hmm.
After Evelyn was murdered, she was dragged about 25 feet to the brush. Close to her body, there was a pretty large rock. It was like 75 to 100 pounds. And it looked like it had been moved. And we believe that because likely there's like an indentation in the yard elsewhere from the rock.
Yeah, it's a big fucking rock.
Yeah, we have some big rocks that were put in our backyard for whatever reason, and we've moved them around, and it leaves a pretty big dent.
Yeah.
Police wondered if that was the murder weapon. That's a lot.
I would imagine that if that's the case, then he wouldn't have picked up the rock and hit her with it. Because if you hit someone with a rock that's that big, one, you have to be incredibly like superhuman strong. But two, it's going to do a lot more damage than from what I understand she had. So I think that maybe he pushed her and she fell into it and hit the side of her head.
Yeah. They're very hard to move. So that makes sense. And especially if there's a struggle, like easily she could have just fallen into it.
If she's moving at any speed, can you imagine carrying a 75-pound rock and pursuing someone? I just don't think that's really possible.
No. And an added note to that, she was 68 when he murdered her.
Yeah. Like, he's elderly fucking women. Who the fuck does that?
I mean, for him, though, it's probably easier. Someone else can run a lot faster. Someone else can get away easier. But these poor women, unfortunately, they can't get away as easy.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, law enforcement had very few leads. And for her case, it didn't really go anywhere until they found that match with Clark's DNA. So it had to sit for a while, which is so sad for her poor family.
Yeah. Clark pled guilty to both Dolly and Evelyn's murders after the DNA match was confirmed, and he received an additional 2 life sentences. We love to hear it.
Yeah.
So this was in 2001. In 2005, another murder was tied to Clark by matching his DNA, and that was the murder of Iva Watson. She was born in Luray, Virginia, to Byron and Ida Kibler-Schenk, which is what her maiden name was, Schenk. She had a brother named Earl. Iva married Roy Watson in 1953, and she also had a son named Randolph. When Iva died, she was a widow, and she had been living on her own for some years. She had 2 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren when she died.
Mm.
On December 29th of 1984, Clark broke into Iva's home, and just like many of his other victims, she ran from her home, and he followed her into the woods that were right behind her home. He caught up with her and beat her to death and then sexually assaulted her. She was 81. I fucking hate it. I fucking hate it so much. So Clark was sentenced to a 4th life in prison sentence. Today, he is still serving his sentences at the Roxbury Correctional Institution in Hagerstown, Maryland.
Good. Fuck him.
So in 1980, we have Dolly's murder. Then in 1981, we have Evelyn's murder. Then in 1984, he murders Iva. And then it's not until 1989 that he murdered Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's all.
I don't either. Yeah, like what would make him just stop for a while?
Yeah.
Unless he was being investigated a lot and he was nervous, but we don't see that was happening.
No, they weren't even considering him. Like, he wasn't even a suspect.
Right. We don't think that he wasn't doing anything during that time, right?
Yeah, and if this were happening today, people would be like, no. What was he doing during those years? Why wasn't he doing? Like, what was happening? It's bizarre that there was a 5-year pause almost.
Right. And nothing that we know of that could have triggered that.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to explore other cases that could be possibly connected to Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement also believes that Clark may be responsible for the 1979 murders of Carvel and Sarah Faulkner. Carvel was 58 at the time, and Sarah was 56. Also, we were talking about it before. I haven't heard of anyone named Carvel. I kind of love it.
I like it as a name.
Yeah. And if their murder was due to Clark, it would have been the first known murder because Dolly's was in 1980.
Yeah.
So this would have been the year before. Carvel and Sarah owned a trash removal company in Howard County. Their business was ran out of their home, and at the time of their death, Carvel was bedridden. One of their employees stopped by the house on April 25th of 1979 around 2 in the afternoon, and that's when they found them murdered. They were found in their bedroom. Carvel had been shot in the head, and Sarah had been stabbed and her throat was slit. Some sources also say that her hands and feet were bound as well, which that would be new, but the rest seems like, okay, there's some similarities there.
It could also be that if this is his first murder,
Right.
if
He's learning.
If it's his first murder, he's like, oh, I don't want her to get away. I'll bind her. But he learns like, oh, there's other things that I can do instead of that.
Yes, yes. In addition to that, in their home, there were missing items. Police also found fresh cups of coffee on their living room table. So police believed that maybe they were chatting with the murderer right before their deaths. Horrific.
Mm-hmm.
While the original theory was that the motive was robbery, about $1,000 in cash was in plain view and not taken from the home. So that doesn't make any sense.
That is one of the weirdest things to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wonder that if because of Sarah's age, I don't know. And like, okay, we're thinking the 1970s. Older women, I don't think 50s is elderly. As I get older, I'm like, nothing's elderly.
Of course.
But I would wonder how routine was it to check for sexual assault?
Right.
I would wonder, are they checking? And are they checking every woman or just like women who like society deems desirable, which is typically like younger women?
That's a fair point.
So we don't know whether she was sexually assaulted or not. I would hope that she wasn't.
Right, right. Well, to connect this a little bit more, too, Carvel and Sarah only lived less than a mile from where Dolly was. So, same area. And then this one, I feel like this one's like very damning.
Yeah.
Clark had worked for their company for a short time. Remember how Kathleen's mom used to call him Stinky because of this? It was a trash removal company.
Yeah.
So it seems like anyone he worked for, where he'd like get to see them and their routine and everything, he was like, okay, this is the target. So it would totally make sense if he did it.
Because their office was in their home, they would often leave their front door unlocked so employees could stop in. So he would have known that.
Yeah. And if they had coffee out, if they knew him, they were probably like, oh yeah, let's catch up. Let's do this. So
yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. So when we were looking up this case, the only other murders that Clark was really tied to, for most sources, was the Faulkners, because it was in the same area.
Yeah.
But we both agree that we think that there's probably more people who he victimized. I understand why they're like, this is probably linked because it's closer, but I don't think they were looking broadly enough to see what other victims he may have had and to see like what was his escalation pattern, because it's possible that he had tried to do things before killing people. Like there is likely a reason why he started that. And so we couldn't find like a database of unsolved sexual assaults in Maryland. I don't think that exists for the public, but we searched Maryland cold cases and then we looked on NamUs, as we do, for unidentified remains and missing people from Maryland.
Yes.
So for cold cases, we found 2 that could possibly be related to him, but neither of them are in Elkridge. So the first is the murder of Sharon A. Kuntz. She was just 26 when she was murdered in a motel room on September 23rd of 1988. Police believe that Sharon was a sex worker and that she would bring men to the motel. They said that the motel room she was in showed no signs of forced entry. She died from blunt force trauma and stabbing. This information comes from the Department of State Police for Maryland's website on cold cases, and they don't mention anything about sexual assault. But again, I would wonder, how routinely are they searching for that? And if she is a sex worker, it is likely they may not have checked. Or they would have been like, oh, this was her job. It couldn't be anything else.
Right. Or if they didn't bother because of that, because we know that too.
Exactly. And remember earlier, we mentioned that Clark gave his excuse for like, oh, this is why I killed Kathleen, because I was out of my mind on drugs, because I've been doing drugs with a sex worker. So our thinking is, if that's something he's saying he's doing, perhaps he murdered someone while doing that. Where Sharon was found was about 15 to 20 minutes away from Elkridge. So is it right there? No. But that's not a far distance.
No.
So we also found the murder of Donna J. Frey. Donna was found on a grassy embankment in Anne Arundel County by a young boy in 1976. Donna was 22 when she died. Per law enforcement, it appeared that she had been murdered elsewhere and then left there. Her body was naked and she had been stabbed several times in her abdomen. Again, we did not see any notes on whether there was any sexual assault and or whether they did check. This does seem different from Clark because he typically wasn't moving his victims far from the crime scene. But it seemed a possible connection, especially if we're talking about 1976. This would have been the first one. He would have been 21 at the time, so younger, but it's possible. So, for our NamUs research, if you've never been on NamUs, it is not for the faint of heart. Unidentified remains are just that. They are remains where they do not know who the victim is, because 2 of the victims worked in Baltimore, but lived in Howard County. We looked for all remains that were found after January 1st of 1970, because that was the earliest date. This was research that I had done, and I looked at unidentified remains records for 199 people, which is fucking hard.
I dread when I have to go to NamUs.
Because they show pictures of the person's remains as they're found. Sometimes it's a sketch, but often the sketch is based off of a person who is dead. Sometimes they try to make them look alive, but it doesn't always cross over. And when you click it, you can see all the photos. And also, just like out of respect, I look at everything, as does Amanda when she's the one doing this research. Just some interesting notes that I'm like, maybe we need to circle back on this. There were to me, shocking number of people who were either found in the harbor or that were found in a vacant building. I'm talking dozens. And nearly every time someone was found in a wooded area, there was a note that said something like, person was believed to be homeless. Person was believed to be a drug user. Like they were like, they're in the woods, but must be homeless or a drug user. No worries. And I'm like, I just feel like we should have a lot of worries regardless of who you are.
Right. I hate that. They're like, they don't matter as much.
Yeah. And oftentimes the remains that were in the woods were in an advanced state of decomposition because they were outside. So it's like, if you don't know who this person is, how do you really know what their life circumstances were? So after 199 unidentified people, we did not see any information about women who appeared to have been sexually assaulted within our parameters and were killed in a violent way like this. I didn't see anything on sexual violence.
No.
I don't know if that's something that they always include, but typically they'll put like person disappeared under like suspicious circumstances and things like that. And there wasn't anybody, or like they'll put like something like victim was found wearing only a top or underwear removed. Like they'll put things like that. And
yeah,
I think that if we were seeing things like victim was found with nightgown pulled up or things like that, like we would have seen something. There also would be DNA.
Right.
Ideally, hopefully, depending on how they were found and if they checked. So nothing for unidentified people. We then looked at missing people. So for the missing people, our parameters were Baltimore and Howard counties. And we looked from 1970 to 1991, which was our 1970 period. And then he was arrested in 1991. So we were like, okay, that's our cutoff point. From what we saw in terms of the missing people, we didn't see anybody who really matched what we had seen in his previous crime scenes, which is he is entering either a person who he knows home or attacking them and breaking into their home by force. And we didn't see any of those 2 items. People that we saw who had went missing were typically leaving a building at a place where they were at. Like one person was leaving a school. Another person was headed to a second location and she was like driving in her car and likely stopped someplace. So we didn't see anybody who matched there either. But I am still unconvinced that those are the only crimes he committed.
Right, because if he was around town and everyone knew him, he might have known everyone's habits too. So he could have been like, oh, I know that this person goes to the store at this time or goes to do their laundry at this time. You know, there's so many different things.
Exactly.
He could have known. So I think there's more.
I think that for a period of time, he was committing crimes elsewhere and doing other things until he became obsessed with Kathleen.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is heartbreaking.
No, it's horrific. And these poor women didn't deserve any of it.
No.
So these were, of course, very, very sad cases. But we're happy to see that some of these victims were matched with his DNA, so they were able to receive justice. I just wish there was more done with all of them, and more testing done to see if he did more.
Yeah.
We don't always see jurisdictions prosecuting murders when the killer is already serving a life sentence. So I liked that these families really could be like, nope. And we added to his sentence.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, oh, well, he's already there. It's, no, we added to it.
Yeah.
Even though, like, you can't do anymore, but good.
Yeah.
Now, there was never any confirmation as to whether Clark had anything to do with the mannequins. And yet, it's still thought of as the Mannequin Murders. Which, again, that is so creepy, and I hate it so much.
Yeah.
And also, like, this case I hadn't heard of before. Had you, living in Maryland?
No, I hadn't heard of it. Most of the murders were several years before I was born. So, and I was born in 87. So I was very, very young when Kathleen was murdered.
Yeah. So, yeah, the moniker's creepy, just all around it. Very weird vibe.
Yeah.
Horrible, horrible person. I'm so glad he's not getting out.
Same.
Now, if there is any cases that you guys know of that you'd like us to cover, especially if they haven't been covered enough,
Yeah.
we want to look into those and either help get the word out or learn from them. Because each one that we go through, we learn different tools. And like when she's talking about NamUs, that was when we were looking at the Texas killing fields.
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was a thing until we started researching. We're like, oh, this is a really cool tool. So throughout research, we learn a lot, and hopefully eventually it might help someone.
Yeah. And I think like also when we talk about these truly, truly awful cases, we learn to ask questions as to like, why are things investigated in a certain way?
Yes.
Why are things reported in a certain way? Why is it that some cases are investigated more than others, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. And how different states do things.
there was so little on Sharon's case, but there was 2 filing cabinets worth of information for Dolly.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
Not at all. Or based off of their job,
Mm-hmm.
how much work they get, to solve their case.
Yeah. It's not always comfortable to talk about some housekeeping stuff when we talk about true crime, but we want more people to hear these stories. So when you leave reviews and things like that, it does help the show get found, which means more people hear this story.
Yeah. So like if you do know someone missing or we can help in any case, we're sharing the information. I'm hoping one day it's going to run across the social media of someone who knows something or like
Yeah.
goes, oh, that sounds familiar. Or like
Mhm.
for cases where we've been looking for ring footage and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I just feel like one day it's going to help someone. I hope it does.
Or the person's going to go, I heard that this person did this first. I'm going to check this person out of my life.
Yeah.
Something suspicious. I'm going to trust my gut because I had heard about a story and da-da-da-da-da. But sorry to interrupt you, Amanda. Continue with your housekeeping.
So yes, please send us any cases that you want us to look into. We'd be happy to add it to our list. You can email us. You can social media us. We're also on Blue Sky now. So
yeah.
find us there.
Yeah, we also have a Reddit, little subreddit,
Reddit.
if you will. I know.
I feel like so behind with the times. I was like, I go on Reddit and like read stuff all the time, but I've never posted or like did anything on it.
Yeah, I'm
so.
typically lurking on Reddit more than anything else, but I was like,
Yes,
it's
same.
our time. It's our time now.
It is our time. Another thing, too, that we would love your help with is if you are loving the show, leave us a review. It helps us grow. It helps people find us. And as a thank you, we would love to send you a sticker. We have some really cool stickers, I think.
Yeah.
And speaking of stickers, we're having a new sticker coming out for our Patreon this year, right? New year, new sticker. So if you are interested in joining our Patreon, it's patreon.com/truecreeps. Our tiers start at just $1. And going up from there, we have a package that includes a sticker. We have ones that include shirts or totes. We have a specialty jam package that's awesome.
Jam cat.
Also, shout out to Mary, our jam cat. On top of that, all paying patrons, no matter what tier, are welcome to join us for Patreon night. That's coming up in February. It's February 28th. And so we're going to talk about our next spooky destination, which I'm really excited to talk to everyone about. We also may play some games, hang out, just chat. It's a fun time. I've had fun every time we've done it.
Also, if you are a patron, just maybe keep an eye out on your mailbox. You may have already gotten just like a little something very silly. I saw it out and I was like, yes, we need this.
This needs to be purchased. Oh,
I
yeah, for
haven't
sure.
done this since I was a little kid. And what a joy. What a treat.
Yeah, we like to send random things occasionally too, which is really fun. When we were in Malvern, everyone's heard of Malvern.
We put it on the map.
We sent we sent everyone a postcard. So we love to surprise our patrons with stuff.
Yeah.
And with all of that information, we hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks for creeping with us.
Thanks for listening. And as always, a special thank you to our patrons who support us via Patreon. Please see the link in our show notes to learn more about how you yes, you, can begin to haunt the dump, guard vortexes, or even become a scorching Sasquatch.
Ooh. Also in our show notes, you can find the link to our website, more information on our sources, our social media handles, and our merch store.
We'd love for you to keep creeping with us. So if you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with your fellow creeps and or ghosts.
I beg of you.